Before we jump in and go into the specifics of writing functions in C, let's just take a look at an example. So here's an example where we have a main function, like we've been writing, and we also have a separate user-defined function named mySum. So we mentioned that there were going to be three parts to writing a function in C. We're going to have to provide something called a function prototype, a function definition, and then we'll have to call the function to actually invoke it or get it to run. So this line up here at the top of my program before the main function is the prototype. The main use of the prototype is to let the compiler know a little bit about the function so that if it sees calls to the function while it's compiling and linking our code, it kind of knows what the function expects and can do some error checking for us. The definition of our function is down after the ending curly brace for main. So here's my main function, the curly braces that define the body of my main function. Completely outside of main, I define my mySum function. And my mySum function is basically, it has the same parts as a function definition in MATLAB. It has a function header, which is this first line up here, and then it has the body of the function, which is the work that that function is going to do. And as with most things in C, the body of that function is inside some curly braces. Now we can take a little bit of a closer look at what's in the function and definition in the function prototype. You'll notice that the function header and the function prototype are exactly the same, and that's by design. So what's in this function prototype? It's the name of the function, mySum, and then a parameter list. So this is just like a parameter list in MATLAB. It tells us what values this function expects us to pass in when we call it. The difference here is that instead of just providing variable names, we also need to provide types. So we have to say what types of variables we're expecting. So here, this mySum function expects 2 integers as parameters. This int over here specifies the return type of this function. So the mySum function returns an integer. Notice all we know is that it's an integer. We don't tie it to a specific variable like we did in MATLAB. The function prototype always ends with a semicolon. Down here in the function definition, again, this first type is the return type of the function. We can only return one thing from a function in C, so it will be a single type here, the name of the function, and again, the parameters. Inside the function, we can declare as many other variables as we want, but any variable declared inside our function will only be available inside the curly braces that define the body of the function. The same goes for any parameters. We can do whatever we want inside the function, and then notice that our function is ending here with a return statement. We're returning num. So since we don't specify what variable we're going to return in the function header, we just specify the type, we have to specify which variable's value we want to return inside the body of our function. So here we're saying we want to return the value of the variable num. The only requirement is then that num has to be the same type that we said we were going to return from our function, and since num is an integer, we're all set. So this is a pretty simple function. It just takes the two parameters, multiplies each of them by 2, and then adds them together. The last part that we want to take a quick look at is the function call, and that's up here in main. So the function call is where we invoke the function. So just defining the function just makes it available. It doesn't actually run it. We have to call the function in order to actually run the code that we wrote. So again, this is going to look really similar to MATLAB. The way we call a function is the name of the function, and then we're going to pass in some arguments in the function call here. And they have to match the type and the number of the parameters that are expected in the function header. So my mySum function expects 2 integers, and so here I'm passing in x and y. Those variables are declared as integers. My function expects 2 integers, and I'm giving it 2 integers, so we're all set. So again, this function returns a single integer. I'm going to store that value in this local variable z so that I have access to it back in main. So function calls are going to work in C very similarly to the way that they worked in MATLAB. We'll call the function passing in some arguments if parameters are expected. And if a return value comes back, we're going to need to store it in a variable so that we have access to that value later in our code. So this was a quick overview of what it looks like to have a user-defined function in our code. We'll delve down a little bit more deeply into each of the individual parts, but I think it's always good to have a roadmap of where we're going. And so again, just remember the things that we're going to be talking about today are the prototype, so how you determine the parameters and the return type for a function, the function definition, how you write the function and where to put it in your code, and then finally the function call, how you invoke your function and get it to run.